Hey guys, Johnny here, Don't Speak News. Well, the covert intel section on Hal Turner Radio is 50-50 at best, whether or not it's accurate or not. But today it gave me pause when I take a look at it because, well, it goes along with a lot of other research that I've been doing and Telegram and other websites and blog posts. And so I'm going to get into it today because it does jive with other things I've been seeing. So here we go. The talks between the US and Russia are not solely about Ukraine. These talks are about the USA being concerned Russian Federation will do exactly the same thing in Venezuela as the USA did in Ukraine, arming them with all kinds of weapons. And they already have been since 2019. We've talked about this many times here recently. So believe it or not, the talks are also about Israel and Iran. According to sensitive, high-level people, the USA is prepared to give parts of Ukraine to the Russian Federation in exchange for non-involvement of Russian Federation in war with Venezuela and Iran. Now we have China, who's there to monitor the Russian Federation because China has interests, the Belt and Road Initiative, in Iran and Venezuela. It is in China's interest that the USA and the Russian Federation do not reach agreement because then China would have to defend Iran and Venezuela alone. So the Ukraine peace plan is just a cover story for dividing interest areas in the world. Everybody knows that Ukraine is finished. Yeah, I mean, that's become obvious. We've talked about that too over the past few weeks. How many people they've lost and how screwed they are militarily. They have no chance of winning against Russia at this point or taking back any territory, and they're lucky to hold what they have. But now Israel wants to take out Iran and Venezuela. And that's very hard, perhaps even impossible, if Iran and Venezuela have help from the Russian Federation and China. Another gigantic problem for the U.S. is the U.S. strategic petroleum reserves. They're running on fumes. And any drone attack on strategic reserves and pipelines, it's over. 100 uranium drones would do the job, and to prevent that, the U.S. needs the Russian Federation to not deliver targeting data and drones to Venezuela, which the drones are already there. They're already in country, ready to go. And rumor has it, outside of this report, that in a war with Venezuela, Venezuela will use those drones against the U.S. strategic reserves and the refineries down in Houston and New Orleans and those areas, and wipe them out and wipe out our strategic reserves and refining capacity. And they're also concerned about that. So it says here the U.S. wants to bring Venezuela oil supplies back online to grab refill of the strategic petroleum reserve on the cheap. A long, costly war to achieve that is not in the U.S. interest. No, it's not. Never has been. That's the reason why the U.S. is ready to provide considerable concessions to the Russian Federation considering Ukraine. The problem is, China is also in play, and China does not want their Belt and Road Initiative to go bust. China invested a total of about $2.5 billion US dollars in 36 countries. It is kind of a lot of money, and China still has a death penalty for embezzlement, among other things. They want the value for the money they spent, and don't want that investment ruined by U.S. military action. So now Europe is enraged and planning retaliation against the USA. European leaders are suspicious that Trump is rushing toward a geopolitical deal in Vladimir Putin while paying little heed to the security concerns of NATO allies. The Wall Street Journal reports a European intelligence service has circulated internal assessments about commercial and economic plans the Trump team has been exploring with Russia behind closed doors. This has reportedly fueled fears among European politicians that the White House is preparing to sacrifice Europe's security in exchange for its own economic gain. Well, of course they would. They would do that in a heartbeat, whether Trump's in office or Biden or whoever. They're ready to hang their allies out to dry. Look at the Nord Stream pipelines, and guess who blew those up? It wasn't some random Ukrainian from Ukrainian intel services. That's a bunch of nonsense. It was a combination of CIA and British MI6. Anyway, so why Europe didn't retaliate for all that is beyond my comprehension. It's part of the plan. So sources tell the Wall Street Journal that European leaders are considering adopting extreme countermeasures in retaliation to this peace deal between Russia and the US that excludes the Europeans. So it's designed to unleash economic chaos within the United States. This alleged plan by the Europeans involves dumping trillions in U.S. government debt owned by European states. A rapid sell-off would likely cause a crash in the value of the U.S. dollar. It would create a liquidity crisis across the banking system and cause a huge spike in borrowing costs. It would also force the American financial sector into a paralysis more severe than the 2008 Great Financial Crisis. A leading European economist told the Wall Street Journal the plan has a potential financial whiplash that could hit the U.S. harder than any external shock in modern history. The EU and the UK are among the largest holders of U.S. Treasury securities, which gives them significant potential economic leverage. You know that involves U.S. debt, of course, which is at record levels. As of December 2024, the United Kingdom holds an estimated $722.7 billion in U.S. debt. The European Union member countries collectively hold an estimated $1.62 trillion. Combined, this is approximately $2.34 trillion, making the EU and the UK bloc one of the single largest foreign holders of U.S. debt. So the potential impact is if Europe were to do as this information suggests and intentionally dump U.S. treasuries, the likely effects would include a sharp increase in U.S. interest rates, weakening the U.S. dollar, and potentially destabilizing global markets, hurting both the U.S. and European economies. Well, they're both about dead now anyway. It would just make it a little bit worse. U.S. borrowing costs would rise as the government would need to pay higher interest to attract new buyers. Imports would become more expensive for Americans, and global financial markets could experience significant volatility, possibly leading to a recession. And Americans can't afford life as it is right now. Imagine if this hits. So the impact on the U.S. economy. Well, we'd have higher interest rates. A large sell-off would drastically decrease the demand for U.S. debt, forcing the government to offer higher interest rates to entice other buyers. Increased borrowing costs. Higher interest payments would become a greater burden on the U.S. government, potentially reducing funding for other areas. Weakened dollar, reduced foreign demand for treasuries could weaken the U.S. dollar, making imports more expensive and potentially fueling inflation. Economic slowdown. Higher interest rates would make borrowing more expensive for businesses and individuals, which could slow economic growth and increase the risk for a recession. So the impact on the UK and the EU, financial instability, the act of selling off such a large amount of assets could create instability within the European financial system itself, potentially leading to a credit crunch and recession in Europe. Then there would be a contagion effect. The resulting global financial market turbulence would likely have negative consequences for economies that are heavily integrated into the global system. Loss of a safe haven. U.S. Treasuries are considered a global safe haven. A coordinated sell-off would destabilize this perception, which could impact future investment strategies and market sentiment for all major economies. So the market reactions would be market volatility. This move would trigger widespread market volatility across asset classes as investors panic and reevaluate their risk exposure. Then it would also trigger contagious selling. The initial sell-off could trigger a domino effect of panic selling by other investors and countries, further exacerbating market instability. And there we go. That's what's going on with Venezuela, Ukraine, Israel, Iran. All of these places are involved in these negotiations. Now, it makes sense to me because I've been reading about how Venezuela and Ukraine are being connected through other blog posts and other Telegram posts. And so how putting this all together makes sense. This Ukraine peace plan is a cover story for dividing interest areas in the world. Everybody knows Ukraine is finished. But Israel wants to take out Iran and Venezuela, and that's hard. impossible if Iran and Venezuela have help from both the Russian Federation and China. So now, if the U.S. can get a peace deal done with Putin and Russia, the idea is that then they can fully turn their attention over to China and screw up their plans for world domination, right? So that's the whole idea here. This would also effectively, if they get this peace deal done with Ukraine and Russia and give Russia all these concessions in Ukraine, then there would be a tit for tat, and Russia would not provide Venezuela with targeting and data information for drone strikes on U.S. strategic petroleum reserves and refining capacity. So that's what the deal is. And then China, of course, would be left alone holding the bag to defend Venezuela and Iran from attacks from Israel and the United States. So that's all. This is also why, in my opinion, that the United States has not attacked Venezuela yet, because they're too worried about what the Russian equipment and all their advisors that are down in Venezuela are going to do in the event that the U.S. does attack. So that's why there's been all of these shows of force, flying aircraft over the country of Venezuela, B-52s and fighter jets, B-1 bombers, and all the staging we've had going on in Trinidad and Tobago and also in Puerto Rico. It's all been a show of force without actually using said force because of Russia and China not knowing exactly how they're going to react to that. Well, I think we have a pretty good idea of how they'd react to it, and that's why they're negotiating so hard right now. So, anyway, I wanted to pass this information on to you guys while it was still fresh and new, and that will be it for now. I will be back with more news later, God willing. God bless, take care. Johnny Storm, Don't Speak News.